Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today is episode 149, and my progressive house fans are going to be happy with today's concept. For today, we're going to be visiting or revisiting the old Bedrock Records catalog. So this will be some serious gems for the progressive house heads, and I know that there's a pretty good amount of them that are subscribed to my channel, so I hope you guys really enjoy this. I wanted to say I know it's been about a month since I did my last upload, and the reason is just absolute straight up fatigue. I've been really stressed at work, and I've been having trouble sleeping, and it just keeps like cascading into the next day. So if I was going on the premise that I would only make an episode when I was feeling nice and energized, none of these episodes would ever get done because I just feel like I'm perpetually tired at this point with no end in sight. And just to give you an example, last night at 3 in the morning, talk about absolute random circumstances. A freaking bat, like the mammal, a bat was flying around in my house at 3 a.m. last night, and I had to put up sheets and dim the lights and try to guide this thing out an open door at like I said, at 3 in the morning. So I'm just a tired man at this point. But these episodes are really fun for me, so I'm hoping this kind of re-energizes me. So back to Bedrock. Bedrock is a mainstay in the progressive house scene. It was founded in 1999 by John Digweed and Nick Muir, and they launched the label with their super epic Heaven Sent track, which is, probably one of the most famous progressive house, progressive trance tracks ever. And like I said, what an epic way to launch the label. And when I think of Heaven Sent, I actually think of the movie Groove, which I think came out also in 1999, coinciding very much with the release of Heaven Sent. And if anybody that's seen the movie Groove knows that they kind of altered the script a little bit, gave Digweed a couple of cameo appearances, and they let the promo version of Heaven Sent be like John Digweed gifts it to an aspiring and upcoming DJ in that movie. And it's kind of a clever way that they wove Digweed's label and his new release into that movie script. I think they did a really good job with that movie and with the script. With, it wasn't like a blatant commercial, but it was a pretty damn good advertisement in general, for like a sneaky advertisement for Heaven Sent. So that's what I think of when I think early Bedrock. And for me, I would say the heart of the catalog, the part of it that I love the most, is probably the 01 to 05 piece of it. Obviously, Bedrock is still running now, and with maybe like different styles. Obviously, the sound banks have changed, but I would say it's still a label that needs to be checked out. I have some modern Bedrocks, but they're not going to be part of this episode. This is for basically the dudes that are about 40 years old, give or take a few years, that grew up on dark progressive and regard these tracks as almost kind of like biblical testaments of the progressive house scene. So I've got 5 picks for you today. And I also want to give a shout out. So this episode is actually inspired by a friend / collector that I came across via Discogs. His name's Rodney, and he's a Philadelphia local that I believe we went to the same parties back in the day, but never really met each other or crossed paths. But Rodney he had a really unique angle on the Philly scene. He didn't work at 611 Records or Q Records, which were, I believe, some of the staples down on South Street, but he had friends that worked there. So when they would get new shipments of vinyl in, they would call Rodney, and he would blind buy these vinyls. And we're talking vinyls that are now 20 to 25 years old, and Rodney was keeping them almost like a museum curator would for all of these years. So he, I guess, finally decided to go digital with his collection. He doesn't want to have thousands of records laying around anymore, and he started listing these records on Discogs. And I stumbled onto him. I just asked him a question. I was asking him to send me a picture. I wanted to see what his VG Plus rating was, and I realized that he was a really conservative grader. And we ended up chatting and ended up kind of building a friendship here. So I want to say thank you to Rodney for all of the awesome tunes that you provided me. I'm going to be a good custodian of them, and I've been enjoying the shit out of them. So thank you very much, Rodney. Back to the episode. I have 5 picks for you today that I think you might actually learn some. I tried to pick some that weren't straight up dead down the middle classics, and there might be some that ended up being gaps in your knowledge. And speaking of gaps in your knowledge, here's a good example of a gap that I had in my knowledge of the Bedrock catalog. This is a 2000 release by a collective named Mainline. Mainline is actually 4 producers, the most famous of which is James Holden. Now, I didn't know, as far as I can tell, I'm just kind of racking my brain here. I don't think James Holden ever appeared on Bedrock solo as a remixer or as a standalone, as like an original producer. But I think this is the closest you're going to get. This is Narcotic / Inner Space. And although Mainline, like I said, is 4 progressive house producers, when I listen to this record, especially the A-side Narcotic, which is what I'm featuring here, I hear nothing but James Holden in this. If you listen to the bass line, it's one of those classic, warm, progressive house bass lines that is really emblematic of the era, maybe a little bit ahead of its time, because other producers didn't start using like those deep rolling progressive bass lines until maybe 2 years later. It was when it really became popular, like 02, 03. So I think James was ahead of his time here. And when I think of the James Holden that I love, it's honestly the old one. In modern times, James has kind of reverted to campfire music, or I guess that's the best way to put it, right? When I think of new border community releases, I picture people sitting around a campfire hallucinating on various substances. And I find that the listening experience, I guess you could call it challenging or complex. To me, it's frustrating and I guess somewhat irritating. But I don't get that same frustration when I listen to James' old records. I love the way that he used to just crush melodics. And this is a good example of that. Like you can hear, it's like somebody just doing like a fast finger. I don't even know what that's called because I'm not a trained pianist, but there's some kind of like really like fast, like clustered notes, building a melody from that. And it's kind of like a melodic jam session. You can just hear James in this record entirely. It might be that the other 3 producers from the collective appear a little bit more on the Inner Space track, but even on the Inner Space track, you can tell that James was at the controls with the melody. So again, maybe you overlook this. Check this out. This is maybe one of James' best moments. Moving up chronologically now, we're now in 2001, and I said when the episode started that I wanted to present a couple of sleepers that you may have overlooked or maybe nobody ever recommended them to you. So there's going to be a mix of just straight up classics and a couple of sleepers here, but I think this one warrants mention. This is Aetherius and their 2001 release, which is Liquid Progression and The Groove here. Aetherius is another producer collective, and when I looked at the artist names that were involved in this project, I didn't know any of them. I mean, they might be prolific under other aliases, but here they came together as Aetherius. I believe this is Bedrock number 24. So you could tell just between 1999 and 2004, 2001, they were already up to their 24th release. So Bedrock was just, for anybody that wanted to keep up with progressive house back in the day, you had to basically be a Bedrock fan. And I think that's why now you have these guys that are aged maybe like 40 to 45 that are just all about this stuff. My choice here is The Groove, and it's a little bit of an understated track. When I listen to it, I really like the simplicity of it. To me, it strikes me as a track that you could start a set with. You could kick off a set with it. It has, like I said, a nice groove, as you would as you would expect with the name The Groove. And I think it would be a good way to kick off a room. Another aspect of this that I think is interesting is that this overlaps with Donato Dazzi's early career. And the reason I'm mentioning Dazzi here in comparison to this is that you'll hear a lot of that acidy, twangy, tinny sound play on both sides of this record that are emblematic of basically like what Dazzi had. He had a monopoly on it back in the day. Like there was nobody else really making a sound like him. Mike Parker was like sort of like the cousin sound to Dazzi. But I just thought it was interesting here that you could see parallels to Donato Dazzi in the progressive house realm. So check this out. This is another $5 record. You can probably get it near mint, and I think it's a banger. Now it's time for the classics. Here we go. Another producer collective that kind of did a flash in the pan moment in 2001 is Tijuana. I don't know any of the guys involved in Tijuana. They only did one track. It was called Groove is in the Air, and it had a various assortment of remixes. Off the top of my head, it had sort of a tribally original mix that I actually really enjoy. Although I will say, if you go and try to actually find the original mix of Tijuana Groove is in the Air on YouTube, you can't find it. It's like everybody mislabeled it and nobody has the original uploaded, which I find hilarious. Like, you just never know what you're going to get on YouTube, and people will be confidently mislabeling tracks all over the place there. There's the FC Kahuna remix that somewhat reminds me of early Peace Division, some of their breakbeat projects. There's a couple of Peace Division breakbeat records, the one with the Method Man sample that kind of reminds me of the FC Kahuna version of this. And I think the most famous for anybody that's watching this episode is the Simon's Future Dreams mix. As you can imagine, Simon's Future Dreams mix is made by a producer named Simon. I went and looked at him on Discogs. His name is Simon Pearson, and I think he was just kind of like a low-key producer that did a few tracks, and that was it. I mean, I don't know who Simon Pearson is, but he knocked it out of the park on this remix. When this is one of those tracks where it's like I love it from the very first beat. It reminds me of of like classic Danny Tenaglia big room house, and it's of the same era, right? If you think of Salita's Be Yourself, or maybe Elements, it has that same dark 3 a.m. nasty New York vibe to it. And I love records that can kind of, like, even as I'm saying that, I can kind of feel like the hair on my arm standing up, because there's just that feeling that you get when you're on a big system and the track is actually being fully represented to you in a way that you can't really get at home. You can't get it. You certainly can't get it on earbuds. Maybe you can get it on your home setup if you've invested thousands of dollars and you can turn your volume up that loud, but you can't really feel it in your chest until you hear it out. So I envy the people that got to hear this on a system. And while I'm on that topic, my good friend Doombot loves to talk about the moment that he heard Digweed play this. I think it was in maybe around 2000, I'm guessing here, 2010-ish. There was a Sleepy and Boo party at District 36 where Sleepy and Boo were the openers in New York, and Digweed came on, and apparently this was like one of the biggest Digweed parties ever in New York. I think they overpacked it as you would expect. I mean, I don't think you could go and see Digweed or Sasha without being crammed in like a sardine at this point. But Doombot loves to tell the story about how the Simon's Future Dream mix got dropped at some ungodly late hour at 4 or 5 in the morning. And you can just imagine at a Digweed party at 4 or 5 a.m., the only people who are left are going to be the dudes that are wearing various Bedrock t-shirts to show their loyalty to the label. And I think from what he says, it was just one of those moments where everybody was vibing. Like I said, the intro to this track is crushing in and of itself, and Doombot often talks about the elements that you'll hear sort of like on a delay, sort of like ricocheting and echoing around the room. And I can imagine that being like a pretty big mind F when it came down to it. So I love hearing other people's club stories, and Tijuana Groove is in the Air is one that I've been hearing from my friend for a while now. Sometimes, even as an avid record collector, I totally miss a classic. And I don't know how this happened. I don't know if I should blame myself or my DJ friends for never recommending this to me. But have you ever heard Bedrock's Emerald? Right? Bedrock, as a producer, is Digweed and Nick Muir. And this, I didn't get this record until a year ago. I had no idea that it existed. I overlooked it. And when I listen to it, it immediately makes me think of the Expander EP, which came out, Sasha's famous Expander, which came out on Deconstruction in 1999, 3 years sooner. But there's just something about the way the melody is constructed in Emerald that is like a straight up time capsule transport right back to Expander. I don't know if it's the tinniness of the melody. There's just a retro element that's captured in there, and I mean, this is like an undisputed, maybe understated classic. With all of the trance parties and all the progressive house producers that I listened to in the mid 2000s, like going out into different warehouse parties and such, I don't think anybody ever dropped this. And I feel like it's a shame because they should have. And finally, to close out the episode today with my fifth and maybe my favorite pick of the entire bunch, let's talk about Steve Porter and John Debo with their track called Deported. First, I want to take an aside to just note the awesomeness of this sleeve. I mean, just showing like a raw picture of shipping containers. You know, you know, just looking at this cover that you're about to get some serious smoke with this one. My pick here is the Deported heavy mix, and I think most progressive house heads would agree that although the original is great, the heavy mix is just undisputed. When I listen to it, I think of Satoshi Tomii's Darkest Moments on Saw. And, you know, I'm going out on a limb here, but if I had to make a progressive house top 10, I mean, just absolute top 10 of the 2000 to 2005 period, this has to be somewhere in there. I mean, it's just, you could tell it's when two producers came together and just had a perfect session together. There's no bad elements in here. The arrangement is great, and the bass line is absolutely crushing. And going back to my friend Rodney that I mentioned earlier in this episode, he actually told me as part of like handing this vinyl over to me, he actually told me the story of hearing Steve Porter and John Debo play this as like a DJ duo at Space Miami back in the early 2000s. I think maybe around the same year or 1 year later than it was released. So just imagine the deep rolling bass line that you'll hear in the sample here on Space's system. I mean, oh my gosh. This now concludes my Bedrock Classics Part 1 episode. Don't worry, I have way more Bedrock ammunition behind me here that I'm waiting to deploy. I don't know if I'm going to do Part 2 right away or maybe go to another concept and then come back to Part 2 later. But if you feel like there's any obvious ones that I missed, just kind of hang tight and they'll probably be appearing in Part 2. But I hope you enjoyed this, and Bedrock fans, please comment down below. Let me know if you've had any experiences with these tracks. I would love to hear it. That's all for today, and take care.